It began quietly. No cries, no visible wounds, just a child slowly learning to stay silent, becoming far too understanding for their age. While other children were afraid of the dark, this one feared the sounds inside their own home. The arguments, the sighs, the breaking of something they couldn't name. From very early on, they learned that to live peacefully, they had to stay quiet, to know when to speak, when to disappear, when to become invisible. Do you remember that feeling? The feeling of having to grow up before you were ready, of predicting someone's mood before opening your mouth, of learning to read eyes instead of hearing words of love, of being good, capable, obedient, not for praise, but to keep the fragile world around you from falling apart? The world looked at you and said, "This child is so strong." But they never saw the fear behind that strength, the fear of disappointing someone, of being a burden, of hurting the people you loved. So you learned to smile when you wanted to cry, to say, "I'm fine," even when everything inside was collapsing, to hide your need for love because maybe, in that house, everyone was too tired to love anyone else. And so you grew up, not truly maturing, just surviving in the shape of someone who learned too early how to endure. Maybe you still carry that child within you, the one who once believed that if they were just a little better, a little smarter, a little more comforting, maybe everything would finally be okay. But you know something? No child should ever have to live pretending to be an adult just to feel safe. And maybe today, as you read these words, there's still a small voice inside whispering, "I'm tired. I don't want to be strong anymore." If you hear that voice, please don't rush to silence it. Because that voice, that small, trembling voice, is the part of you that has been waiting all these years to finally be seen, to finally be heard, to finally be held. You grew up under the eyes of others, and they called you mature, composed, reliable. But no one knew that behind those compliments was a child who learned to suppress their emotions just to keep the world around them from falling apart. From an early age, you understood that crying didn't help, and asking for help only made things worse. So, you chose silence, as if silence was the only way to keep the peace. You learned how to comfort adults instead of being comforted. You became the glue that held everyone together, even while you were quietly breaking inside. You knew when to smile, when to hide, when to disappear. You were so perceptive that a single sigh told you what was about to happen next. People called it intuition, but really it was the reflex of a child who had lived too long in constant alert. You began to understand other people's feelings more than your own. You comforted, you listened, you did everything to make others feel okay. But did anyone ever ask if you were okay? No, because you were too capable, too strong, too independent. So much so that no one imagined you could fall apart too. And so you carried that adult role through your whole childhood. You were afraid of being a burden, afraid of disappointing someone, afraid that if you let go, everything would collapse. That fear grew until it became part of who you are. Somewhere along the way, caring for others became the way you avoided acknowledging that you also needed care. The world saw you as strong, but you knew that strength wasn't natural. It was forged in loneliness, built from nights when you had to whisper, "It's okay," to yourself, when really someone else should have been saying it to you. You became the rescuer in every relationship, the one who understands, who yields, who heals. Yet inside, you were tired. So tired that you can't even remember the last time you were allowed to be weak. You still smile, but it's no longer the carefree smile of a child. It's the learned smile that keeps others at ease. You still love, but it's no longer a love born from freedom. It's a love laced with responsibility and fear. The child you once were has disappeared, replaced by a small, grown-up soul who knows how to survive anything, but not how to truly live. No one is born wanting to become an adult, but some children never have a choice. When the adults in the house are too tired, too wounded, or too empty to be parents, the child unconsciously steps up and fills the role. They learn how to keep the peace, because if they don't, everything might fall apart. Psychologists call this parentification, when a child is forced into the role of an adult, taking care of, comforting, or carrying the emotions of others long before understanding their own. And the frightening part is, the child doesn't know it's unfair. They simply think, if I'm better, everything will be okay. They learn to read the room, to listen for tone, to memorize every look. Every breath from the adults becomes a survival signal. If they're happy, the child is safe. If they're sad, the child blames themselves. Slowly, survival replaces childhood. That child isn't allowed to be angry or tired or to simply be a child. Every feeling gets buried deep beneath layers of being good and strong. And when they grow up, they carry that shell with them, not because they want to, but because they're afraid not to. When you have to grow up to survive, you forget what it means to actually live. The brain of a prematurely grown child functions like a radar that never turns off, constantly scanning for danger, tracking every shift in someone's mood. It's hypervigilance, the nervous system's way of guarding against the fear of being unsafe. But the very thing that once protected them becomes the thing that traps them. As an adult, you still do it. You still read people, still smooth things over, still put your own needs last. You call it kindness, but in truth, it's a wound that was taught to smile. For you, love becomes duty, kindness becomes responsibility, and joy becomes a luxury because you've grown used to carrying the sky on your shoulders. The heartbreaking truth is that the child once saved everyone, but no one saved them. No one noticed that the child was slowly disappearing, piece by piece, in their effort to keep everything from falling apart. You weren't wrong for growing up too soon. You were just never given a choice. And when choice is taken away, strength is no longer a virtue, it's survival. And so the child grew up carrying the whole world on their small shoulders. But no one ever taught them how to put that weight down. They became an adult, only different from the rest, because while others learned how to dream, they learned how to survive. While others learned how to love, they knew how to endure. And when people talked about happiness, they just smiled, as if happiness was something meant for everyone else, never for them. Do you see yourself in that story? The strong one, the listener, the one who's always there when someone needs help. But no one asks, who will be there when you need someone? You've become the person you once needed, yet you've never treated yourself the way you treat others. You carry that inner child into every relationship, every job, every dream. You care for others as if love were an obligation. You fear disappointing people. You endure in silence, terrified that if you speak up, you'll lose the love you've spent your whole life protecting. You're exhausted, but you don't rest. You're hurting, but you don't allow yourself to fall apart. Because inside, that old voice still whispers, if you stop, everything will collapse. So you keep going, trying harder, doing better, controlling everything, until one day you realize you no longer know what normal feels like. Perhaps the scariest part isn't growing up too soon, but forgetting how to be a child again. You don't know how to receive, only how to give. You don't know how to be loved, only how to sacrifice. You don't know how to lean on anyone, only how to stand tall, no matter the cost. Others see you as calm, but inside you're pulled tight like a string, one small gust away from breaking. And sometimes you envy those who can be fragile. You envy the ones who can cry, scream, or need someone without shame. But you only know how to stay silent, just as you always have. You don't live, you endure. You're not happy, you're functional. You're not free, you're just familiar with the weight. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it, because to you, this has become normal. Silence was once your way of keeping the peace, but now it's a prison. Responsibility was once your pride, but now it's your chain. And the strength everyone praises, that very strength has taken away your right to be weak. You thought you had grown up, but really you just got older, carrying the same small child inside you, still sitting alone, still waiting for someone to come back and whisper, "You don't have to be strong anymore." Maybe what hurts you isn't that you had to be strong, it's that you were never allowed to be weak. You carry the image of someone who's always fine, always knows what to do, always takes responsibility. You thought it was your nature, but it was only a role your childhood forced you to play. And you've played it for so long that you've forgotten who you are when you no longer have to be strong. No one taught you how to let go. No one ever told you that peace doesn't come from controlling everything, but from accepting that you can't. You've spent your life making sure everyone else was okay, because deep down you feared one thing, that if they broke, you would lose your place in love. But real love doesn't need to be earned through responsibility. And real safety doesn't come from suppressing emotion, but from allowing it to exist. You don't have to save anyone anymore. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you too need saving. When you begin to look back, you realize that every strength you've carried was born from fear. You became a caretaker because once you were abandoned. You learned to control because you once lived in chaos. You taught yourself independence because no one was ever there to hold you. But now, you are no longer that child. No one can take your childhood from you again. And you no longer have to keep performing roles that have outlived their purpose. There's a difference between growing up and surviving. Maturity is being able to look at your past without letting it define your future. Survival is existing by running away from yourself. You've survived long enough. Now it's time to start living. If these words feel like they're speaking to you, maybe it's time to pause and take a breath, just to realize that you're still here, still whole, still worthy of peace. You don't need to be strong to be loved. You only need to be real to be seen. You don't need to hide your past. You just need to be gentle enough to turn back and hold it. Because healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about no longer letting it control what comes next. It's not about finding the childhood you lost, but allowing the child within you to live the rest of their life. Through you. Maybe you never had the childhood you deserved, but you can still have the life you do. And this time, you don't have to be strong to survive. You just have to be real to live. And when you begin to accept every part of yourself, even the weakest ones, you realize that this is what true strength really is. You no longer need to run from the child you once were. You no longer want to silence them. For the first time, you turn back, kneel, and see them, not as a memory, but as a living being waiting to be held. They don't need your apology. They just need your presence. Someone patient enough to say, "I see you. You never deserve to be left behind." That's when healing begins, not from anyone else, but from you. Healing isn't forgetting. It's looking back without fear. It's not erasing what hurt, but letting that pain become proof that you survived. Healing isn't about becoming a child again, but allowing that child to finally rest. You no longer try to carry the whole world. You learn to say no without guilt, to love without strain, to receive without feeling selfish. And slowly, life stops feeling like a duty and starts to feel like a safe space, a place where you can be real, be soft, be human. You begin to see that the strength that once saved you also made you feel alone. But now, you no longer need it to survive. You just need presence. Simple, quiet, and true. If you're hearing these words and your heart feels a little softer, stay for a while. Sometimes you don't need to understand everything. You just need to let yourself feel. Because maybe, for the first time in a long time, you no longer have to be strong. You start to forgive your parents, those who didn't know how to love, and yourself for staying silent for too long, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. And one day, you'll realize you don't have to prove that you've healed, because the truth is, you're still on that journey. And that journey, no matter how slow, is still moving toward the light. You were once the child no one protected, but now you are the one who finally can. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this time, you no longer have to be strong. You just have to be present, honestly, with yourself. Maybe through this entire journey, what you were truly searching for was never a new childhood, but the feeling of being safe enough to be yourself, even just once. And now, when you look back, you might still see the pain, but it no longer consumes you. It becomes proof that you've lived, that you've loved, and that you were strong enough to survive what was never perfect. You no longer blame the child inside you for being fragile, and you no longer resent the adults of your past for not knowing how to love. Because forgiveness, sometimes, isn't about forgetting. It's about being free. You no longer need anyone to tell you that you're enough, because in the end, you've finally said it to yourself. Maybe the child within you still doesn't know how to smile, but at least they've been heard. And sometimes, that alone is enough to begin again. As the final sound fades, you realize maturity isn't about running away from the past, but having the courage to turn back, look it in the eye, and smile. Because in the end, you were never truly weak. You were just never safe enough to stop being strong.